Okay, so for this video, we're going to quickly just review some greatest common factor and least common multiples. So remember, the greatest common factor is the biggest number that can go into both of those numbers. It's possible for the greatest common factor to be 1 because they're prime numbers or they don't have any factors in common. And it's also possible for the greatest common factor to be one of the numbers. For example, if we have 10 and 100, 10 would be the greatest common factor because it can go into both numbers. We also have least common multiple, so this is the smallest number that is in common between the two numbers that is also a multiple. So remember, multiples are going to be bigger because when I multiply, I get a multiple of that number. Factors are going to be smaller. So make sure we're checking our work. If at the end your greatest common factor is accidentally bigger than one of these numbers, then maybe we made a mistake somewhere. Or if our multiple ends up somehow being smaller than one of these numbers, then again, that's a check for a mistake. So the way that we do our greatest common factor and least common multiple, the first method that you guys go over is listing. Sometimes when our numbers are getting bigger and bigger, that might not be the best method to use, although it is still a good method if it's a smaller number and that it works faster for you. But we're going to go over prime factoring. So to remind you guys, prime numbers are numbers that are only divisible by 1 in itself, like 2 and 3 and 7. So those are all prime numbers because no other numbers can go in there. Okay, prime factoring is when we divide out the prime factors from the numbers. And then when I multiply all of those prime factors back together, I should get the original number. So in this method for this video, when we are prime factoring, we're going to look at the prime factors of both of the numbers. And with this method that we're about to use, you don't always have to pull out the prime factors. It's just a starting point because those are always the smallest numbers. So this is my favorite method, although there are a lot of other methods for greatest common factor and least common multiple. So we're going to go ahead and get started with 12 and 10. We're going to find the greatest common factor and we're going to find the least common multiple of each of these numbers. So for 12 and 10, this method, we have them in an upside down division house. And so what we're doing is we're looking for numbers that can go into both of them. Of course, the easiest thing to do is if they're both even, we can go ahead and pull out a 2. And because we know they're both even, a 2 can go into both of them. So that's going to be my first step, is I'm going to pull out a 2. Then my next step is to write down what I have left over after I divide out the 2. So 12 divided by 2 gives me a 6 left over. And then 10 divided by 2 gives me a 5 left over. And then we're going to do our checks. Okay, so 6 and 5, they don't have any other factors in common. So that is the trigger for me to know I'm done pulling out my common factors. So for GCF with this method, our GCF is always going to be the left-hand side. Sometimes you might have more than one common factor, and if that's the case, you just multiply them together. But in this case, we just have a 2. So our GCF for this one is going to be 2. And then the way that we do least common multiple with this method is we make an L. L for least common multiple, LCM. So L for LCM. So when we do that, we're going to multiply those factors together. So we're going to go ahead and write out that our GCF is 2, and our LCM, we have to multiply these factors together. So when we make our L, we're taking all of those factors, 2 times 6 times 5. So 2 times 6 gives me 12. And 12 times 5 gives me 60. So the least common multiple between those two is going to be 60. So remember that we're not just going to go ahead and multiply them together. That will give you a common multiple, but it won't give you the least common multiple. Okay, we're going to go ahead and use this method one more time on these two numbers, 18 and 24. So again, an easy start for me is that they're both even, so I can go ahead and pull out a 2. But if you already know some other common factors, you can go ahead and pull those out too. Like for example, they're both divisible by 3. They're also both divisible by 6. So if those are what you want to start with, you can. But prime factoring, you would just pull out the prime numbers. But with this method, you don't always have to prime factor. But we're going to go ahead and pull out a 2. And again, just like we did before, we're going to divide out the 2. So 18 divided by 2 gives me 9. And then 24 divided by 2 gives me 12. So again, we're going to do those checks. In this problem, 9 and 12 still have factors in common. So we have to add another ladder to our ladder method, another division house. And we're going to go ahead and find another common factor. 9 is only divisible by 3 and itself. So 3 is our common factor here because 12 is also divided by 3, or divisible by 3. So 9 divided by 3 gives me 3. And then 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. So since 3 and 4 don't have any factors in common, I know that I'm done. So we're going to go ahead and find our GCF and our LCM. Our GCF, remember, is the left-hand side. So with this one, we do have to multiply some common factors. We have 2 times 3, which gives us 6 as our GCF. And then for our LCM, remember, we're making an L of our common factors and our non-common factors. So for LCM, we have 2 times 3 times 3 times 4. And when we do that, 2 times 3 gives me 6, times 3 gives me 18, and 18 times 4 gives me 72. So the least common multiple between those is 72. Okay, so if you have any questions, always make sure to let your teacher know. You can rewatch this video as much as you need to. That is the review of greatest common factor and least common multiple.